Today we're unboxing an iPhone 6 that's been sealed in its box for over 10 years. I found this on eBay for a really good price. It was only around $110. Taking a closer look at the packaging here, you'll see that this is definitely in its original shrink wrap. So on the front here, you only get an outline for the silhouette of the device. But that felt pretty fitting for this model, as alongside the iPhone 6 Plus, these were known for being the first really large iPhones. On the side here, we'll see our iPhone text in the silver color. So this was matching whatever color your device was purchased in. There was also a gold or a space gray model. And on the back here, we can see that this is the top end 128GB model. That's really cool because this was the first iPhone to be offered with such a large capacity. I checked the serial number for this specific model and it turns out it was produced in May of 2015. I'm only going to slice the plastic film from the back here. And that way at least the box will still look sealed from the front. And now let's take a look at this iPhone for the first time since 2015. And there we go, our very first look at this iPhone 6. Of course it's looking perfect, and I'm really glad that I picked the silver color option. We'll use this pull tab here to lift it up. And there we go. Wow, this is actually the thinnest iPhone model ever made. The first thing I want to do is connect this to power and see if the battery will charge up after sitting in a box for 10 years. And perfect, we actually do get the charging screen here. I got the Apple logo for a second and I was afraid that the device would go into a boot loop, as it's definitely common and expected for a battery to sustain some damage after not being used for so long. But this one is giving us some good signs of life, so we'll set it to the side and allow it to charge up. And in the meantime, we can take a look at the included accessories. So this iPhone 6 was from an era where Apple was still really generous with the included accessories. You not only have your charging cable here, you also have a power adapter as well as headphones. The power adapter here was a relatively small and slow 5-watt, but the headphones here were pretty cool. These were known as earpods. Plus it came with this really cool reusable carrying case. And now we'll take a look at the included literature packet. So there's a pretty basic quick start guide here, as well as some warranty info and 2 Apple stickers. Oddly enough, the Apple stickers are something else that is no longer included with new iPhones. I think it's so nostalgic how all of these accessories used to be included with every iPhone. But I guess I do understand why Apple stopped including them. And okay, after only a couple of minutes, our iPhone 6 does appear to be powering up. And perfect, it boots right into the iOS 8 setup screen. I think I'm actually going to power the device off and let it charge up just to not stress out the battery too much. So I'll give this quite a few hours and I'll resume the video when it's ready. Okay, well it's been a few hours and I now have the iPhone 6 fully charged up. From the setup screen here, I can definitely tell that it is running its original software version, iOS 8. And I believe according to the May 2015 production date, this should be running 8.3. So let's go through the setup process now. And there we go, we are met with the iOS 8 home screen and a prompt to update to iOS 12, which we will definitely not be doing. Let's jump into settings so we can see which version of iOS 8 we have. And nice, just as expected, we have 8.3 here. We also get confirmation of the 128GB capacity. And that's just crazy for one of these because the vast majority are the base model 16GB. It looks like there are 6 applications installed, so let's go check out what those are. And it looks like these are just some pre-installed Apple applications. Unfortunately, in my experience, these never work. I always have to re-download them from the App Store. So anyway, I'm going to spend some time with this iPhone, download some applications, and get some content synced to it. And then we will take a closer look at it. But first, I want to get this plastic film removed, which this is definitely the most satisfying part of unboxing any sealed iPhone. So the iPhone 6 was released in September 2014 alongside the iPhone 6 Plus. And these were very significant models for Apple. They would go on to be the best-selling iPhones of all time. They were most known for being the first iPhones to bring a big increase to the display sizes. So the iPhone 6 here had a 4.7-inch display and the 6 Plus had a 5.5-inch. Prior to this, the largest iPhone Apple sold had a 4-inch display. That was definitely getting to be small for the time, especially compared to popular Android phones. So making iPhones this large was definitely a departure from what Apple had done in the past. Those previous iPhones with a 3.5-inch or 4-inch display were always capped at that size to be comfortable to use one-handed. But that was just a value Apple had to let go of to stay competitive. I remember back in 2014, the hype for the iPhone 6 was just insane. There were huge lines for these at the Apple Store, and I remember the launch even being covered on the news. Aside from the larger displays, there was an all-new design. So this model was extremely thin. It would go down in history as being the thinnest iPhone ever made. Although that may be changing in a few weeks with the release of the iPhone 17 Air. But the design here for the iPhone 6 shifted back to a curved design, which we had not seen since the 2009 iPhone 3GS. The iPhone 4 through 5S had much more of a boxy, squared-off design. And the iPhone 6 was all aluminum, while the previous models had some glass on the rear panels. There were also certain design cues on the previous models, like this diamond chamfered edge. This was not present on the iPhone 6, so some felt that the design of this was a step down, especially because there was more plastic to be seen on this model with the antenna lines. And while I do agree that the iPhone 5S design is more attractive than the 6, I still think the 6 looks really good. This was the very first iPhone to feature a raised camera bump. Every iPhone after this, except for the first generation SE, would feature one of these. And of course, this raised bump is tiny compared to what we have today, but I definitely remember it being a little bit controversial for the wobble that it would create. The iPhone 6 models also relocated the lock button to the right side, as considering the size of these, it was no longer ergonomic to reach all the way to the top. The volume buttons were now pill-shaped, and the speakers and microphones on the bottom featured an updated design. There was also a really cool detail where the glass would actually curve toward the edge of the device. I remember thinking that detail was so cool back in the day, but it did make it hard for screen protectors to stay adhered around the edges. But with any discussion of the iPhone 6 design, we have to acknowledge Bendgate. So that was the big controversy where these models were able to be bent very easily. And that was especially applicable to the larger 6 Plus model. There was a viral video from Unbox Therapy bending one of these pretty much in half. And while that was an extreme, it was also something that could easily happen over time in natural situations. So things like keeping your iPhone 6 in your back pocket could easily bend it. Most cases of the bending were pretty subtle, but it could lead to some functional issues. Particularly on the 6 Plus, again, there was a common issue where bending of the logic board would lead to touch disease. And that was basically just phantom touches that would occur all over your screen. So yeah, Bendgate was definitely a big concern, and it was something that Apple would not end up fixing for the iPhone 6. They did, however, rectify it with the iPhone 6s by using a stronger aluminum. So Bendgate definitely tarnished the reputation of this model a bit, although it did not prevent it from being the best-selling model ever. On the inside, it was powered by Apple's A8 chip. It was just a marginal improvement from the A7 chip found in the iPhone 5S. And the 6 would end up receiving the same amount of software support as the 5S through iOS 12 in 2018. It only had 1 GB of RAM, whereas the following year's iPhone 6s would receive 2. And that definitely helped future-proof that model, which would end up receiving support through iOS 15. The 2015 iPad mini 4 was also powered by the same A8 chip found here in the iPhone 6. But this iPad did receive the 2 GB of RAM and the iOS 15 support. So that's pretty interesting. It's too bad that the iPhone 6 did not receive the 2 GB. The cameras on the iPhone 6 were still 1.2 megapixels for the front and 8 megapixels for the rear. But this rear camera now featured focus pixels for improved autofocus. It could also record 1080p video at 60 frames per second now instead of 30. And it could do slow-mo at 240 frames per second instead of 120. The iPhone 6 carried on the Touch ID sensor that had just launched 1 year back on the iPhone 5S. So that was really cool to use, and it definitely saved you quite a bit of time from typing in your password over and over. It also worked with the Apple Pay feature, which was new for this model. So using NFC technology, this was the first iPhone to feature Tap to Pay. You could originally get the iPhone 6 here with 16, 64, or 128 gigabytes of storage. And it was available in the silver, the gold, or the space gray colors. It received expected price drops over the years and a bump in the base storage capacity to 32 gigabytes in 2016. This model was officially discontinued in September 2018, but brand new units of the iPhone 6 were definitely floating around after that date in different markets or with prepaid carriers. And now let's turn our attention to iOS 8 on this device specifically. So this was understandably a small update over iOS 7, which had just brought a full redesign to iOS 1 year back. There was now a new row for the passbook icon with this red credit card across the top. There was also a new look for the control center. So this one was just a little bit easier to see when something was turned on. There was a new health application for iOS 8, and this was very fitting because the Apple Watch was announced at the same time as the iPhone 6. There were also more apps included on iOS 8 by default, so we had the iBooks application as well as Podcast and the Tips application. Tips would just tell you how to use different features of the UI. There was an exclusive feature for the iPhone 6 models using iOS 8 called Reachability. So if you would lightly double tap the home button, it would bring the content from the top of the display down. And that just made it easier to grab things with the larger displays. There was also a new QuickType keyboard with iOS 8, so you would get some suggested words across the top. The multitasking in this version would now feature your recent contacts across the top. Let's try out Siri here with iOS 8. What's the weather like in New York City?
It's currently clear and 73 degrees in New York.
What version of iOS am I running?
You're running iOS version 8.3.
Also, the App Store still works with iOS 8. Currently, this is the oldest version of the App Store where you're still able to sign in and download applications. I was able to install over 100 applications to this device. So that's just incredible. I love to have all of the space with this 128 gigabyte model. I downloaded some of the Apple applications as well as some nostalgic games and even social media apps. None of these work here in 2025. You're not able to sign in, but I just thought it was nostalgic to have them here on the home screen. I also synced my iTunes library to this. And that's especially cool here on iOS 8.3 because this version was the last to feature something that had been present since the original iPhone. So that was CoverFlow, which you could access by turning your device into landscape mode while in the music application. This look for CoverFlow started with iOS 7. So it was a little bit different from what we had with iOS 6 and older, but it was still kind of the same basic concept. With the iOS 7 and 8 cover flow, you could actually pinch to make the album smaller or larger. And to access these songs inside, you could just simply click on one. I think it's really sad that Apple removed this feature with iOS 8.4, but I guess it was just something that they didn't want you to use with their streaming service, Apple Music. Now let's take a look at the default wallpapers here for iOS 8. So first we have the dynamic category here. These launched with iOS 7 and it was basically 7 different options for colors that had moving dots. And we also have a legendary selection of stills. So there are 43 options here to choose from, and I pretty much think each one of these looks incredible. There were some plain kind of abstract choices from iOS 7, but there was also a really nice selection of nature-themed choices. So we have the blue space theme default from iOS 7, as well as the newer purple space image with the snowy mountain from iOS 8. And there were some interesting choices here that were used in marketing for the iPhone 6. So this purple flower was commonly used for the space gray model. This other purple flower with the white background was often used for the gold. And this green leaf image was used for the silver model. I do think this looks nice, but I just have to stick with the default for this version. And of course we find the parallax effect on the home and lock screen that started with iOS 7. This gives everything a pretty cool floating look. So that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone 6 that's been sealed in its box for nearly 11 years. Opening this device was such an incredible experience. I'm really surprised that the battery is holding a charge after all these years. So be sure to get subscribed for more sealed iOS device unboxings. And leave me a comment below with your thoughts. I'm especially curious to hear what your favorite color for the iPhone 6 is. I personally really like the gold, but I think the silver is my favorite just for how classic it feels. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.